This is a description of the case study of an older adult assignment. This assignment is to be completed with an older adult who you find within the community. This can be someone who you are familiar with, but ideally is with someone who you are not yet familiar with. So maybe you have a peer that has a family member who's an older adult, so anyone over 65, or you meet someone in the community, or you have a neighbor you don't know that well. It can be someone in your family, but ideally is someone that you're not as familiar with, so you get the experience of what it's like to do a true occupational profile and establish rapport and select assessments with the limited information that you get from an occupational profile. So part one is the occupational profile. It's no more than 1 page. You will perform an occupational profile with an older adult in order to understand their unique perspective on the aging process. You will meet with the older adult at least 2 times to complete this full assignment. The first meeting will mainly focus on gathering information for this part one, the occupational profile. The occupational profile must include a client report, which should be de-identified, meaning you're not including any of their real names or their real birth dates or anything like that. You can include their age, but we shouldn't be able to identify the person from the information you are giving us. You can use initials, you can use a fake name, and you should include a detail somewhere in that first page, just that this is de-identified information. You need to include context details, including cultural, personal, temporal, and virtual. It's not either or. You need to include at least all 4 of those contexts. You need to include performance patterns, client factors, and areas of concern and the client goals. The occupational profile should be written out in APA format. You can use the AOTA occupational profile template. However, the information gained should be in written format when submitted. So you're not submitting that actual template. Part 2 is the evaluation. So this is no more than 2 pages. You will administer at least 2 assessments during the second meeting. The assessments chosen should relate to an area of concern that the older adult has that is expressed in their occupational profile interview, or a specific assessment that both the older adult and you find interesting. This is the case when maybe you have someone who's a part of that well elderly group and they haven't expressed any concerns in their occupational profile and they say they're doing great and they're functioning great. Then in that case, you can both decide on an assessment that you think would be interesting to complete. You can choose to focus on balance, falls, cognition, ADLs, IADLs, or a leisure assessment. You may also choose which assessment tool to utilize. You must choose at least 1 norm-referenced assessment tool and 1 criterion-referenced assessment tool. These assessment tools will be gone over with you during the lecture about geriatric assessment. This next part is very important, and that's why it's bolded. You are expected to demonstrate sound judgment in regard to safety of self and others, i.e. the person that you're working with, the older adult, and adhere to safety regulations throughout the occupational therapy process as appropriate to the setting and the scope of practice. You may be required to assess and monitor vitals such as blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory status, to ensure that the client is stable for intervention. If you have any hesitation about the older adult's ability to participate in the assessment, all activity should be stopped and the professor should be notified. You must take all safety precautions into consideration when completing this assessment and this assignment. So remember, you need to plan out before you go there to meet with the older adult to complete the assessment. You need to think about, how am I going to provide this person with rest breaks if they need them? Can they have regular water if I offer it to them? All those little details should be planned out before you meet with the older adult. This part 2 section of the paper should include a description of the evaluation process, including what precautions were taken to ensure both the safety of self and of the older adult. So this is really, your part to describe, like, how did it go? What happened when you were doing the assessment with the older adult? Not necessarily the scoring, that comes later, but in this part, it's really saying, where did you complete the assessment? How did it go? Was the person open and excited about it, or were they really nervous about completing this assessment with you? And any details like that. The next is the reasoning behind the chosen assessment. Okay, so that includes, definitely highlighting, well, in their occupational profile, they said that they were having some trouble with their memory and remembering to take their medications. That's why I chose this assessment, etc. It should also include the reliability and validity psychometric properties of the assessments, and that you'll find in the research. Or even the instruction manual from the assessment tool. Next, you're going to include the scoring of the assessment using the assessment manual, so it should be cited. And then lastly, and I think almost most importantly, is the functional implications of the results of the assessment, meaning if the person scored perfectly on this falls risk assessment that you did for them, what does that mean functionally? What can they do within their environment, within their community? Same thing if they did not score well. If you saw them have trouble with a certain aspect of the assessment, what does that mean for their functional task? And be specific. So maybe this means that it's not safe for them to step into a tub anymore, and they should be using the shower stall they have in their house, or they should be using a transfer tub bench. And that's just giving the example of falls, but take that into all other domains as well. You must really think out, what are the functional implications of this assessment? Because that shows why we even did it as an occupational therapist. Why did we find it important to do this assessment? And lastly, there's part 3, which is the intervention plan, which should be no more than 2 pages. This is an explanation of the potential occupational therapy interventions to address concerns of the older adult. They should be outlined and relate back to the case study. Support this with at least 3 evidence-based research articles within the last 5 years. At least 1 intervention should include a piece of assistive technology and/or a device, so like electronic aids to daily living or positioning systems, etc., used to enhance occupational performance and foster participation and well-being of the older adult. The second intervention must focus on some type of environmental modification that you deem appropriate based on the principles of ergonomics and home modifications. This paper should be no more than 5 pages total. Please submit it as a Word document on Canvas. It's important that you submit it as a Word document, not a PDF, because on the Word document, we could provide more edits and more feedback right there on the paper for you. Thank you.